police officer, and I couldn't really look anybody in the eye. I was looking down at my hands, and I just shook my head slowly. And, of course, they sent a police officer in to talk to me anyway. And it was, I'm telling the truth when I say, yes, he did rape me in the morning, and he acted more uncomfortable around me that day, and I was trying to pretend like everything was okay and that didn't happen. So I had said that I wanted to make love to him that night. I had to tell that police officer that if I was going to tell the truth about anything. And, of course, that's not what happened. I was willing, and he made sure that I wouldn't be willing. And so I ended up getting raped 2 times in one day.
Do you feel that the police and the Adult Protective Service and the system in general has failed you?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. I draw an SSI check. I have been told that I'm disabled. Adult Protective Services says if you can cook for yourself and bathe, then I don't meet their criteria. To them, I'm not disabled. They're not even considering the psychological area of disability.
Marlena, I would like to welcome we have another caller here from Northeast Texas. Good evening, Northeast Texas.
Yeah, am I on?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, I had a little trouble. I lost the phone number, had a little trouble finding it.
Well, I'm glad you're here now. Welcome to the show, Henry. Marlena has come on. She wishes to remain anonymous. She is a mystery woman, a victim of severe abuse and multiple rapes. She shared a lot of that with us before you came on, but I think you got on here a moment ago enough to hear and know some of it. If you would like to ask a question of her, she's here tonight to answer questions or make comments, either one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to ask her what she thinks the rise in what she thinks is causing all these rapes and everything nowadays.
Rapes in general, or what my experience has been?
Well, domestic violence, rape, all that
what do
stuff.
I think is causing any man to rape any woman?
No, why it's more of it nowadays than there used to be?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, I cannot answer that. I don't know why anyone does those kind of things, other than they have made a conscious decision to do it.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. They've decided to do it. I don't think many of them just get a sudden urge to do it. I don't think so. Maybe so. I don't know.
Well,
it's only right, though. Go ahead.
I had met a man online that had rape fantasies, and he said that he himself said that it started out when he was a teenager, seeing it on TV, in different movies. He said it didn't matter that his mother was sitting beside him. He would become aroused. And he said that even though a woman might tease him unmercifully, he never acted on it. He would find girlfriends who had the same fantasy of being raped, and it would all be played out as real as possible, including him wearing a leather jacket and leather gloves and breaking in. So I really don't, I never could understand it, and of course that online relationship veered off because we were not on the same page. I didn't have rape fantasies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it may be a cop-out and an excuse, but right before Ted Bundy was executed, he made his televised final statement, his last words, that the cause of his violence against women was looking at pornographic magazines. Now, obviously that was an excuse that Ted Bundy was using, but do you see the demeaning of women as a contributing factor to the nationwide epidemic of violence against women?
Women are a contributing factor? Is that what you're asking me?
Pornographic. Do you believe that the pornographic magazines are a contributing factor to male aggression toward women?
I think there's certain things that they encounter along the way, like in movies and things like that, seem to make it okay. Seem to make it as kind of part of life. and you'll get away with it more than you won't get away with it. But nothing denies the fact that they are still making a conscious decision to carry that out and bring it to life, real life. They want to control.
Henry, in your research, what have you discovered or uncovered about the epidemic of male aggression toward women?
Well, it seems to me like well, I've noticed that the more female contact a boy gets when he's growing up, the more likely he is to objectify women. More likely he is to have a lot of women, use women. But beyond that, I really don't know. So, in other words, it's an imbalance, a gender imbalance in the way people are raised. You can be raised with too many brothers or too many sisters or something like that. I know that people that are raised with like twins, for example, a male-female twin that are raised together, they don't have any trouble with rape or domestic violence or anything like that. They don't. I'm not saying they don't have trouble, but they don't have as much trouble because they grow up. They're used to dealing with the opposite sex, and they have a good relationship with the opposite sex.
That's very.
I think a lot of it has to do with how you're raised. I had a brother, or have a brother, and of course I had a father too, and they were both, and still, my father's passed now, but my brother is, and my dad too, were both real respectful of women. They always were, and that's what my brother was taught from, our dad. So I think that's got a lot to do with it too.
Exactly.
They don't, see women as, sexual objects.
Yeah, we learn what we live.
Yeah.
Well, since I was a child, boys were my friends. I was the closest thing to being a tomboy without actually being one. I didn't like any of the rough stuff, but as far as looking for bugs under rocks and playing with worms and things like that, I like that. Don't like bugs now, but I did then. And I noticed that he was very comfortable around women.
Marlena, one of the ways in which he's controlled you, you had talked about he would take your clothes away from you so that you couldn't leave. You'd be nude. You wouldn't have access to your clothes.
That was the first thing he did. That was the first sign of abuse, is when he actually took my clothes away from me and told me I had to sleep naked. And sometimes in the mornings he would tell me I had to take my clothes off if I wanted to smoke any mess with him. And that didn't work. I was willing to not get high and keep my clothes. So he didn't do that to me more times.
Have you been able to get away from him totally, or have you had any further contact with him?
I haven't had any contact with him since March 16th, which was my birthday. And he had... the sad thing is I woke up in a good mood and was trying to maintain that and being silly and laughing. And for whatever his reasons, he took a wet washcloth and popped me in the face. Well, it hit my eyeball, and it caused a headache that I would later go to the emergency room and, they would give me some ibuprofen. But he had also, before I left, he had threatened to, he held up a knife and said that he was going to slit my throat. And I haven't seen him since, because I got up, put my clothes on, and I just started walking.
And based on your experiences with him, you have no doubt that he is capable of cutting your throat.
Yes. Supposedly he'd killed a man in Oklahoma the actual details I've never been told. But I do know he spent 8 years in prison in Oklahoma.
You mentioned that he had 3 previous wives. If I'm not mistaken, at least 2 of them died in somewhat questionable accidents.
He claimed to have been married 4 times. The first one he said he divorced because she wouldn't take care of the children. The other 3 died. 2 in car accidents and 1 cancer. I have met his mother, who died 2 months later. I have met his brother, who wouldn't look at me, his daughter, and his favorite niece. And I could have asked them questions, but he never left my side. See, I would have to ask them questions about him in front of him. And I didn't want to see that, because I didn't feel like I would ever get an honest answer anyway. His mother did tell me, control him, and smiled at me before she died. And I just smiled and nodded, thinking, there's no way I can control this guy.
I understand.
Sounds like you were lucky to get away from him.
I feel that I'm lucky to get away from him. It hasn't been
probably lucky to be alive.
Absolutely.
Very possibly. There was 3 occasions, 3 nights in a row where I was certain that he had drugged me. The first time we had smoked meth, remember, methamphetamine, and I went unconscious while performing oral sex on him. And then I woke up, and I realized what was happening, and the next thing I know, it was a blackout again. And the very next day, I didn't know who he was that morning. I didn't know who he was. And I tried to play it off, asking him for a cigarette, trying to get my mind together, and of course, eventually it would dawn on me who he was. The next night, same thing happened. And on the third night, because the last thing I would remember is, hey, you want to drink the rest of this Smirnoff? And I'm not much of a drinker, but I did like the screwdriver Smirnoff. He never offered me his drink. He must have put something in him. And whether that was like my own Ativan, ma'am?
It could have been like Rohypnol, the date rape drug.
Someone suggested that to me, because it's out of your system in 6 hours. But the next morning, of course, I didn't remember him again. And the third night, I was drinking the Smirnoff, and I looked down, and I said, uh-oh, because I just realized he tricked me again. 3 nights in a row. That's kind of part of my disability, is that I can have blackouts, even if nobody's there to bother me. I can still sometimes not remember what happened the day before without any kind of drug or alcohol. That's just the way I am. I don't know why. But he's going against me.
Marlena, if I recall correctly, there was an incident where your dog suddenly collapsed on the floor, and you felt as if maybe he had also been drugging your dog, that beautiful Alaskan Husky.
I still feel that he was drugging her. When the rapes were occurring, where was my dog? We had consensual sex, and dogs are going to get curious of what you're doing over there. Well, the rapes, my dog slept through. So I always felt he was 5 steps ahead of me no matter what. He seemed to know what I was going to do before I did it. And because of the meth, I really didn't know necessarily what was real and what wasn't, because meth can make you paranoid. Well, the situation I'd gotten into with him anyway would cause paranoia. And anyway, I didn't know who I could trust. I didn't know who I couldn't trust. I felt that I was dependent on this abuser. And then, of course, with all the bad times are all the good times, when he would be fun to be around. He seemed to have different personalities. I'd never seen anything like that before, the way he could just suddenly switch and become a frightened 14-year-old boy with freckles. And I asked him one time, did you have freckles when you were young? And he said yes. And, of course, I saw pictures where he did. He could look anywhere between 36 and 60-something. And he did. It wasn't wearing his hair differently or different clothes. It had nothing to do with that.
Do you believe that he is a sociopath? Do you believe that he has multiple personalities?
I'm not sure. I have to believe to some degree about multiple personalities because I know what I saw. And how he could act so young one time and then like an old man that was an old country guy that he knew I hated that guy. I mean, I would actually say to him, you know, don't start acting like that country guy. Don't start acting like that old country guy. I don't like him and you know it. So it seemed like he could control it to some degree. He was just making these choices. There was 2 or 3 times that I saw him make a conscious decision to switch personalities because it would serve him better in whatever he wanted to do with me or to me. One of his personalities, and I only saw this guy like 2 or 3 times, and that's the guy I lived for. He was a really great guy. He was fun to be with. He was a very good lover. And, but I'd only seen that guy like maybe 3 times.
Marlena, what are some of the steps that you've taken to try to protect yourself?
Not going back to my own house. On the time
you're literally not living in your own house right now because of this guy.
Right, and I'm moving. I go to different houses, so he can't find out where I'm at. And from what I understand, he has a call or text a friend of mine saying, "I know you know where she's at. You'd better tell me, or you're going to regret it." Things to that effect, which make you feel like, oh, I can't stay with that person because I've got to protect that person. This is my mess, and I can't drag anyone else into it. The cops were not helping. The police wouldn't help. I got court-ordered into a psych ward for being homicidal and suicidal. And one cop who had dealt with my situation with him more than once came to the emergency room and said, well, how can you want to kill him, but you want to kill yourself too? Well, I couldn't really answer that other than to say, you know, when you commit suicide, you're choosing the way you want to go. Having your throat cut with a serrated knife would not be one of those things. I wouldn't want to die that way. Because I'm
Sounds like that police officer had not had adequate training in dealing with people in a crisis, traumatized situation.
I would have to agree with that. When I did do the 15 days in the psych ward, I came back and all my furniture was gone. My stove to cook on, my microwave. I already didn't have a refrigerator that worked.
Did you make a police report about that?
No, I didn't, and I should have. I was so psychologically blindsided with that, and the cops had already not been helpful. One officer had told me that he owned half of that because he was living with me for 5 months at that point. And I said, you mean to tell me that all these things that my parents owned before they died and the things that I have bought myself before I even met him, that's community property? And he said, yes. Of course, that's not true. But
right, I think that policeman is an error.
Yes. It made me feel like that the police were not going to help me. And
how did you end up with a guy with a psycho like this?
I met him through someone else.
How old were you when you met him?
I was 48, and March 16th I turned 49.
It was like a blind date or what?
No, I made a decision after smoking meth with him and the guy that I did know, and that clouded my thinking, and it was also detrimental. You don't ever make a very heavy, important decision when you're high or anything, not even alcohol, nothing.
Were you married before?
I had been married 3 times.